So ultimately the goal is, this is a quote from, it was like Leo Rose, that this is kind of like their motto. We hope to make abortion, not to make abortion illegal, but make it unthinkable. And based on what we just talked about, we can start to understand where abortion forms kind of a fundamental building block in the modern ethos. Freedom of difference, sexual revolution, et cetera, et cetera. Like when abortion was made legal in Ireland, right? I mean, the streets were full of people cheering, right? Yay, we finally get to kill babies, right? But in the sense of it's a freedom of indifference, right? Finally, I can choose A or B. But you notice that even with freedom of indifference, there's always some choice that's better than the others, right? Like you should go and have sex with everyone you ever wanted as many times as you want. Versus not doing that is unhealthy. Well, I thought it was anyways. So it's inconsistent, but that's not unusual. So we want to touch hearts and minds of those that God puts in front of us. Until the opinion of America shifts, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, is, I think, in a sense, kind of a fool's errand. I mean, so obviously we've had a shift in the sense that we have some more conservative judges on the court, like Kavanaugh. I use that term very loosely because he's more like a wishy-washy moderate. And they've actually had abortion cases that could have been heard by the court. And you need 4 members of the court to say they'll hear a case, right? So you need 5 to win the case, but you need 4 that are willing to listen to it. And they've had an abortion, at least one, if not multiple, come to the court, and only the 3, so there's really 3 true conservatives, there's 4 true liberals, and then there's 2 kind of moderates. Kavanaugh's one of them. And so Kavanaugh and the other moderate, when an abortion case came, they were like, no, we're not listening to this. Because what they want to do is not touch it with an 80-foot pole. Now, laws like the Alabama, some of these more strict laws, might force their hand, which is actually kind of ironic legally, which we'll maybe talk about later. But the thing is, as long as, so really we're fighting kind of really a deeper cultural battle here. Obviously we want to solve this evil, but there's so much roots to this evil. You know, the abortion is in a sense the putrid flower, and so we're cutting it down. Obviously it'd be good, but anyways. So as we can see, there's a lot more going on here than just a bad law. Now we will say most people that fall into that middle 60% are more uneducated of abortion than anything else. So maybe with careful persuasion and knowing the arguments, knowing the underlying, knowing this issue in and out as best as we can, those people we can help. So maybe we can shift the opinion of America. Like I said, really the opinion of America is for the taking in a sense. We have the truth on our side, right, easily. And as I've already talked about, those who are really far left, those who are really far pro-abort, probably can only really be saved through prayer. Okay, so at this point we're going to kind of transition. So we've dealt with philosophy. We're going to transition into really just the nitty-gritty arguments. So this is maybe the more fun part, the apologetics. So yeah, we'll just see what arguments I actually thought of, and then we'll see what arguments you guys think of. So, obviously, it's an undeniable scientific fact that from the moment of conception, we have a unique set of DNA, which is neither the mother's nor the father's, right? The moment we got sperm and egg, bam, we got a new thing, and it has its own DNA that is no one else's. It self-replicates, right? Really, you can ask someone, well, what is the definition of life? And different people might come up with different answers, but I think the only answer that makes sense is sometimes people say breathing, sometimes people say heartbeat, and those are really, really stupid definitions of life. because the trees outside have neither lungs nor hearts, but we would call them alive. So something that is alive is something that has that self-replicates, basically, right? So the tree takes in nutrients and it replicates itself, and it continues to grow. One day, that tree will cease replicating itself, and it will fall. It will be dead, right, and eventually fall over and rot. But so basically, as long as we are self-replicating, we are alive. And the moment we cease self-replication, that's death, right? That's the definition of death. So I think that's a far more useful definition, is a thing that self-replicates, right? It takes in nutrients, turns them into itself, really, right? And replicates itself. So some other more just really basic facts, right? So what kind of DNA is it? Well, it's human DNA, obviously, right? That's a fact. In fact, from the moment of your conception, almost everything about you was determined. Your hair color, your eye color, you know. It definitely flies in the face of freedom of indifference, right? That's actually where we start getting, where philosophically, just on a philosophical level, this is a bit of a scary discussion, because so much of who I am was not chosen by me. 99% of who I am was not chosen by me. Maybe 99, maybe 0.9, you know? So freedom of indifference finds that very disturbing. So like I said, the definition of life is an organism which is capable of self-reproducing its own cells. Also note, all life is dependent on some kind of food source, whether it's sunlight or some type of chemical or whatever, right? Everything is dependent on something. So the dependency thing is totally meaningless, right? Like, well, the child, this zygote or whatever, this clump of cells or whatever, well, they're dependent on the mother. Well, so is everything ever dependent on an outside food source. Can I just lock you up in a room and starve you to death? You know, but it doesn't make any sense. And clearly, of course, young children are very, you know, if you were just to leave them, they would die, right? So anyway, so we clearly have a human being that is alive. This is undeniable scientific fact. Sometimes, I mean, rhetoric is just that, rhetoric, you know, and I'm sure you've seen, you know, nowadays, you know, I saw a couple months ago, the one that Alabama, you know, when those new laws could just come out. The UN, this is how scary this is. So the woman who is in charge of the UN Human Rights Commission, like who's in charge of watching the world to make sure that human rights are being maintained. All I saw was headline that says, you know, new abortion laws in America are unscientific and barbaric or something like that. And when you see that, now if you just saw it out of the blue, I was like, oh my gosh, is there actually like someone who's got it together at the UN Human Rights Commission who actually has their head on their shoulders? And then I go and I read it, and no, it's the laws that are outlawing abortion that are barbaric and unscientific. Unscientific! I'd love to see what science they're living under. But, you know, be very, very, very careful. This is not, we're not talking about climate change today, but it's the same kind of thing. Be very, very, very careful when someone says, some scientists say. Okay, show me the data, show me the research, show me the charts, let's, you know, but no, just be very careful when, you know, so like when she's like, oh, it's unscientific, what's that, what? It's a human being and you're killing it, that's a fact. Now, maybe that's an okay thing to do. That would be a different philosophical argument to make. But saying it's unscientific is just ridiculous. Okay, so here we go. This is the fun part. So we're going to go bit by bit by any argument I can come up with. And then you guys will have time to come up with your own. So this one's pretty classic. It's probably one of the most classic, certainly for the people who are either in the middle 60 or Catholic politicians who want to pretend that they're Catholic. Right? So I'm personally against, but. Thing is, put this in any other context, it makes no sense. I'm personally against genocide, but who am I to say the Turks can't kill all those Armenians? I'm personally against eugenics, but who am I to say Hitler made a bad choice? I'm personally against rape, but, you know, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? Either, basically, like I said, the argument only makes sense if the person has not thought the issue. Either it's good or it's evil, right? And maybe it's a necessary evil. Like, what would be an example of a necessary evil? That meant, you know, so in classic Catholic theology, we say double effect. So what would be maybe like, you know, there's a million examples. One I kind of commonly use is like bombing a factory during World War II. So obviously, bombing factories is clearly bad, right? I mean, in kind of just in a vacuum. Bombs going off, buildings being destroyed, pretty clearly bad. But you're in a war, and the factory's producing tanks for Nazi Germany. So, you know, you bomb the factory to try to make the war shorter so less people die. And you don't want civilians to die, hear ring sirens and get to safety. But they might die, right? That's kind of like the unintended consequence, blah, blah, blah. So that would be a case where we would say, then in some sense, like, I am for bombing an enemy factory during a war if all things being equal, right? So, but I wouldn't say I'm like personally against bombing a factory during a war, but you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. Like, so either defend it or don't. Like, it's just a very wishy-washy position that isn't really thinking through it. This is another very, very common, right? This is like, well, abortion should be legal for like rape and incest, right? So there should be the clause, right? These clauses, and even most of these pro-life states that are making pro-life laws are trying. Even when they try to do a pretty strong ban, this will usually be like the asterisks, right? Rape and incest. So a couple problems with this. It's not a logical argument, it's an emotional one, right? Because, well, so first, they make up less than 1%, but even if they didn't, there's a couple problems. So first, is it a life, right? Or either it's a human life with dignity or it isn't. And so we've already established that it is a human life. So can we hold someone accountable for the crimes of their father? Can you go to jail because your dad committed a crime? Now, he won't go, but you will, right? You know, the death penalty could be justified for like a convicted rapist, but why do we have the death penalty for the convicted rapist's child? Right? It makes no sense. That's why it's emotional. It's appealing to your emotions. It's like, oh gosh. So remember when I talked about misplaced mercy? This is a classic case of misplaced mercy, where we want to be compassionate, but it's the compassion of giving the heroin addict another heroin. Oh, they're suffering right now. Here's another heroin, right? It's that kind of compassion. In actuality, in these rare cases that it doesn't, but it is real, right? It's a real thing. Well, first of all, there's a classic expression in law: hard cases make bad law. But reverse it. So I don't know if I invented this or I've heard it, but so if you want to make bad law, find hard cases, right? So that's one thing that makes rape and incest so attractive as an argument for pro-abort people, because it's a hard case that appeals to most people's emotions. So they're like, oh well, yeah, duh, abortion should be, you know, that woman got raped. Like, well, okay, first of all, how is killing her child solving the issue? Secondly, if you actually look at the reality of abortion, it's a huge open wound. So you're just pouring salt on this already open wound in this woman's life. Like, this is not the solution to the problem. And in kind of a very very weird turn of events that is true, abortion actually aids the perpetrators of rape and incest. So there are known documented cases, and people have done stings on Planned Parenthoods, where it's like a 40-year-old man will go in with like a 14-year-old girl who says she's pregnant, and they have no problem taking her. And there have actually been times where, like a rapist, like either the father, stepfather, whatever it is, will abuse a local Planned Parenthood with their victim, and it's just, all the evidence is gone, right? And Planned Parenthood doesn't care. I mean, this is a horrible crime, like an explicit crime, but they don't care, right? So hardly Planned Parenthood is helping rape and incest people. Okay, so this was another very, very common one. So, right, abortion is your reproductive right. And they use that language all the time. But this doesn't make any sense because reproduction has already happened. So if reproductive rights means anything, it's not simply gibberish. It must exclude abortion, not include. Because that train, right, reproduction happens at the act of conception. At that point, the reproduction train has left the station. So now we're dealing with, so in other words, whether or not you can kill your child is not a reproductive choice, because that's already happened. It's a parenting choice, right? Just a key thing to note, before Christianity really spread in the ancient world, I don't really know if abortion existed much, but one thing that was ridiculously common was infanticide, where what you would do with unwanted children is you just take them out into a mountain or some barren region, just leave them and then walk away. It's very common. So this practice of dealing with unwanted children is in every culture ever, basically. Except, hopefully, like a truly Christian culture, right, where we say no to this. But ultimately, it's a parenting choice, right? I don't want to parent this child, so I'm going to kill him. It's not a reproductive choice. Okay, this one's a weird one. This one's kind of common too. So, yeah, I have the. So one thing is I think you guys actually have the updated. I accidentally have the old one, that old PowerPoint. This is fine, because I remember what I'm going to talk about. There are a couple of key fallacies that we need to deal with, and that you're going to see again and again and again and again and again. I'm just going to talk to two main ones. Ad hominem and straw manning. We've already talked about straw manning. So straw manning is when you make someone's position ridiculous in order to attack and defeat it. Ad hominem is where you don't deal, it literally means to the man in Latin, and it's where you don't deal with the argument, you deal with the person making the argument. Okay? This is all over the place nowadays, everywhere. You're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe, you're a blah blah, you're a blah blah. If there is a you're a, or your argument doesn't count, even the whole like, how men, I think I have that later, but how men can't talk about this issue, that in itself, that's ad hominem. Logic is logic. And either it's, even if it's coming out of the mouth of a squirrel, it doesn't matter. If it's logical and true, it's logical and true. But if it's false, it's false. So attacking the man makes no sense. So the pro-birth argument, this is just one in a many ad hominem attacks against pro-lifers, right? We've already mentioned kind of the white supremacist thing, but it's very, very common. So they're attacking your motive. So in this particular one, you're not really pro-life, you're just pro-birth. You just want to get the child out of the womb and then you could care less about it, which even that doesn't even make any sense when you think about it logically. You either care about children or you don't. Now when someone uses an ad hominem attack, I think almost the best way to respond to it is to thank them for admitting that you just won the argument. Because if you can't deal with the argument, it means you know that you've lost. And your only hope is to attack the credibility of the arguer. So, but anyways, but even if this was true, right? Even if it was true that all we cared about was getting babies born and then we could care less, there's still human beings that deserve to be protected, right? The truth is still the truth. So even if you were pro-birth and nothing else, which doesn't even make any sense, what you would be saying is still true. Even if your motivations are confused, what you're saying is still true. And that's the problem with the ad hominem attacks is even if this person has confused motives or whatever, if their argument is true, their argument is true. Truth is truth, right? Even if the biggest liar on the planet says the sky is blue, or you're going to start believing the sky isn't blue, right? It still is true. And so, but the fact is, we all know that this is utter garbage, because in reality, pro-lifers are exactly that. They're pro-life. They adopt. They support pregnancy centers. One thing you'll note is, I don't know if I put that here. Yeah, like Planned Parenthood, did they give out diapers and children's clothes? Like, no. They're there to get you aborted, period, right? They have no other real services. But like pregnancy centers, like we've all been to them, I'm sure. They have diapers, they have clothes, they have baby food, they have all this stuff, and they have classes that help, they clearly want these mothers to succeed, right? And this is one of those common arguments you'll also hear where, like even from people who are like kind of leaning pro-life but aren't like committed, where they're like, their big thing is like, well, but the problem is like, there's kind of this image that, yeah, we really don't care. We have some weird, almost like a fetish for getting children born, but we could care less about anything else. Or it's like, we care about the children, but not the mothers. And it's like, well, just look at how pro-lifers actually act. They care about the mothers, they're helping the mothers, they're getting them classes, they're getting them food, they're getting, you know what I mean? Like, just go to any pregnancy center anywhere that's an actual pro-life pregnancy center, and you can just see how blatantly false this is, right? This one's kind of a funny one. So, you can't argue against abortion. Well, I'm not seeing you adopting them. Are you adopting them? Now, even if you were, but generally speaking, yeah, for most of us, we're pretty committed to whatever children we currently have. And even if we could adopt, maybe we could adopt one or two, but not, a million, obviously. So, yeah, so here they caught us with our pants down. Yes, all those babies should die. So this fallacy doesn't make any sense because the amount of people I could personally adopt is very low, perhaps none. So what, I can't oppose murder or like, so can I go, so if someone were to say this argument, a good response to them is, oh, can I just go murder a homeless guy right now? I mean, no one is going to adopt him. Right? It's the same exact argument. No one is going to adopt this homeless person, so his death is meaningless. This means, this logic if it was true, you can't oppose any evil anywhere, basically. Certainly any murderous evil. You can't oppose anything, because you weren't going to adopt them. Genocide, well, you weren't going to adopt them. So yeah, this argument makes zero sense. Okay, this is a common one as well. So, this argument claims that life will be so terrible for these unborn babies that we might as well kill them now. This actually was made explicit in the Alabama, when they were voting on the abortion. Remember, there was only like 3 that voted against, but there was one Democrat who said, who voted against, and he said, listen, they're either going to kill them now or you're going to kill them later, because these children of the, that get born that would have been aborted are just going to be criminals and do crimes and eventually get on death row, and then eventually they're going to be killed on death row. So you might as well save everyone a whole lot of trouble and just kill them now. And I'm rephrasing, but it's basically, I'm not really exaggerating that's what he said. And, but that's the argument, right? And so he formulated it very clearly. But it's pretty terrible from a more, so it makes sense in a certain kind of sense, but it's certainly terrible from a moral standpoint. So first, who gives you the right to judge that their lives are unworthy of life? And I find that phrase very meaningful to me, because that was what the Nazis judged, that there were certain lives unworthy of life, right? And that's exactly every evil philosophy ever finds that there are certain lives that just don't make the cut, right? And for us, it's innocent children, if we don't want them, right? So it's kind of like that every child should be wanted. So if you're not wanted, well, we put a bullet in your back, right? Or we tear you limb from limb, literally. But just because you're not wanted doesn't mean you're not valued. But and isn't living a meager existence better than not living at all? How many people in the world right now, if this logic was true, would have committed suicide a long time ago? But for some reason, most people, suicide is pretty disgusting to us. We just have a very vitriolic reaction to it. And most people fight tooth and nail to survive, even in difficult situations. And sometimes people in difficult situations go on to flourish, right? There's those rags to riches stories, which do happen, right? And so, some of the most famous people come from difficult circumstances. Well, I guess they should have just been killed. So it really is pretty simple. Why don't we let that person make that decision for themselves, right? Isn't that the whole premise of everything? Is everybody gets to make choices for themselves? Also, why is killing them the immediate solution? Like, shouldn't you, help them? Like, give them economic help or something? Like, why is killing them the immediate, obvious solution? So this is kind of a footnote to the last one. So this is the idea that kids will be in foster care forever, so you might as well kill them now. So again, they're going to go through so much suffering and pain, you might as well kill them now. So there's a couple problems with this. First, the children that are aborted are usually, if the alternative, let's say the mother really had no real desire to raise the children themselves. Well, the other option is adoption. Now, the adoption line is down the block. Like, there are so many people who want to adopt in this country, but there aren't enough children for them to adopt. So clearly the child would have been given up for adoption. And most of those people who are adopting have to go through such a rigorous process, right, that they are clearly capable and desiring and, everything, right? And so the problem with the foster care argument is it just isn't true. Foster care tends to be, 99% of the time, child is born, raised in a very dysfunctional home, and then eventually they're taken from their family because it's so destructive, and then placed in foster care, in which case they're usually very sadly very broken children, which is obviously understandable. And the brave men and women who try to help these children and raise them, and the reason why sometimes they go from foster care to foster care is because they're so broken that they're almost impossible to deal with. Obviously, it's horrible and tragic. But it usually it really has nothing to do with abortion. Because if you, instead of aborting, would have adopted, which there are plenty of people who want that child, then the child would never even see the foster care system, right? The foster care system is in kind of a totally different ballpark. But even if that wasn't true, then why don't we today, right now, go to every foster care and kill every one of those kids right now? If this is true, if their lives are so worthless, forcing women to get tubal ligations, then we're going to force you to get vasectomies would hold water. But that's not what's going on. As a Catholic PSA, I'm sure, if just so we're all on the same page, the Catholic Church is always has been, and we will be strongly against, in the strongest terms, giving vasectomies or tubal ligations. because we were always to be open to life, right? And the story I always tell my couples when I first prepare them for marriage is that one of my best friends, I'm sure many of you know, Father Tom Hannon, he's a child of things like 11, 12 brothers and sisters, something like that. I always forget. But he's like 12, 13, 14 years younger than all of the rest. So his parents had like about 10 kids, thought they were good, and then had a little bit of surprise 13 years later, and he ended up becoming this great man, this great priest for the diocese, and a good friend of mine. But so if they had said, okay, we're good, we're done, well, he wouldn't exist, right? So we should always be open. But anyway, so that's just a little PSA. This one is interesting. So this is an argument from hypocrisy, which is sometimes known as ad hominem tu quoque. So this is, again, it's another ad hominem attack, but it's a more focused ad hominem attack. So it's more like, well, you do it. So the simplest example would be if I was simply you're smoking, telling you like, hey, never smoke, just don't do it. And you'd say, well, you smoke. So you're trying to negate my argument by my actions, but that doesn't in logic mean anything. Again, is it true or is it false? And the person, who knows, maybe the person has experience of smoking, they're trying to quit, they can't get off of it. Maybe they're even in a privileged position to tell you not to smoke. But regardless, truth is truth, it doesn't really matter. So the argument here is that generally speaking, the pro-life group is lumped in with kind of like, that, the right as a whole. So like gun control is you're for no gun control or whatever. So anyways, so it's making a false equivocation again. So the idea is, well, conservatives want gun laws to be lax, let's say, but in an act of hypocrisy, they want to regulate women's bodies. Well, this is a false equivocation because, on the whole, certainly legally, we're not trying to control women's bodies. We're just simply saying you can't kill children with the power that you have, right? Which is true when the child is out of your womb, but for some magical reason, when it's inside your womb, you can murder it and have no problem with it. So the equivalent, if you really do encounter this gun control thing, the equivalent would be if a conservative wanted to make homicide legal, right? That's the equivalent. Like homicide with a gun would be legal because of Second Amendment, right? In the same way that, well, I can kill my child because Roe v. Wade, right? That would be the equivalent. Okay, so this one is very common, right? This one's one of the most common, all the time, everywhere. This argument, this one should be pretty obvious, especially when we went through the facts, right? This argument would hold water if it were true, but clearly the fetus developing inside the woman is a separate person with unique DNA from the moment of conception. So this argument is, it's not your body, And even if you were to take this argument on face value, does that mean you have the ability to chop your arms off or that we're healthy? If you went into a doctor and said, hey, there are people who have a mental illness that believe that they shouldn't have certain limbs. So they go in and they say, doctor, cut off my right arm. I shouldn't have a right arm, And this is real. It's rare, but it's real. Should the doctor cut their arm off? Or should the doctor say, no, my duty is to do good or at least to do no harm? And no, I'm not going to cut your arm off. You need something else. There's something else going on here. You're misdiagnosing the solution, right? So let's work through this. Let's get you some help. No, I'm not going to cut your arm off, right? That would obviously be the compassionate thing to do from the doctor. But our modern day and age tells us the compassionate thing is to cut their arm off, right? And so, even though my body, my choice, that doesn't really make any sense. But yeah. So what we have here is a true medical marvel. We have a woman who has 4 arms, 4 legs, and 2 hearts. Or, this is probably not true, it might be another human being. Right. So either this woman has a weird manifestation of multiple legs and arms in her body, inside of her, or it's another human being. Okay. So this one, all the women in the room agree with, certainly with their husbands. Right? And I work with every couple every couple I've ever worked with. I always tell them that as long as he knows that she is always right, their marriage will go really well. And the woman always she's like, yeah, and the guy's always kind of like, come on, Bob. The woman clearly, she's like, yeah, I've been telling him that, I've been telling him that for years. But anyways, so this argument claims that the only thing men really want is to control women. And thus these laws are a draconian attempt to do that, and they need to shut up. So there's a couple things. So obviously, just on the facts, again, this is ad hominem. Even if it was true, it doesn't change whether the facts are true, right? Still a human being, you still can't just kill human beings because you feel like it's cool at the moment, right? But it's obviously factually false as well, because the leaders of pro-life movement are women. And that's supposed to be half, not half. Half of abortions, probably slightly more, are actually girls, right? Girls are aborted, certainly worldwide, far more than boys, but even in our own country, right? They actually, a couple years ago, tried to make a law, the Republicans tried to make a law that it would be illegal to abort children. This was in the actual House of Representatives or whatever. It would be illegal to abort children if the reason was because it was a girl. And the Democrats, of course, voted it down, so it didn't get passed. So they're okay if the reason is because, some feminists, right? So, so I already kind of mentioned this. But the other thing that's interesting is they'll say this, but in the same breath they'll say men need to stand up. Right? We need men to stand up. Well, so it's the same. Here's the thing. If you're pro-abort, your voice matters, whether you're a man or a woman. If you're a man, you need to stand up. And a woman, of course, you need to defend your right. But if you're pro-life, then you need to shut up. Whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't really matter. So the whole men need to shut up thing, it really should just say people who are pro-life need to shut up. Because women who are pro-life are not, as I'm sure many of you can attest to, are not treated with the milk of human kindness.
Father?
Yes?
I always felt that abortion must have been created by men, and I don't see how men have their, cake, their pleasure, and then you look at that child, no child support, no helping raise the child, no anything. The men are the winners here, and the women, I don't understand it. I don't see how they're not seeing that. They're letting these guys off scot-free. Don't they see that? I don't.
Yeah. So no, that's another counter kind of argument that I forgot about. Is you're right that the people who seem to benefit the most from abortion, and I kind of mentioned it with the rape and incest one, are like men who want to use women in a sense, right? So you're right. That's a great counter argument. Well, to answer your philosophical question, it comes back to the freedom of the difference, and particularly the particular manifestation of that with the sexual revolution was that, basically, it's pretty simple. If the meaning of life is the fact that you have the power to do choices, well, which would you rather be? If that was true, would you rather be a man or a woman? From a certain basic sense, you'd rather be a man because you've got the power to make your choices happen. And so what ended up happening was with the feminist, third wave feminism, was that women needed to be men, right? So basically everyone was equal. This is one of our modern world is obsessed with the word equality, and it's very, very misused. Is an apple equal to an orange? Well, in a most specific mathematical sense, no, obviously. So we overuse the word equality all the time. And are men equal to women? No. Are they equal in dignity? Yes. Are they equal? No, obviously they're not. Our bodies are very different, we have very different hormones, we're very different. And so, but what we're obsessed with nowadays is more like mathematical equivalency rather than like value equivalency. We want everyone to be equal in math rather than value. So, anyways. So the constitutional argument, this is kind of a legal argument. This is the idea, they say like, oh, well, Roe v. Wade says, or oh, it's in the Constitution. Well, it's not in the Constitution. I can make a way better argument for slavery than abortion from the Constitution. The Supreme Court also ruled in favor of slavery once upon a time. In reality, Roe v. Wade is universally regarded as terrible jurisprudence and has no basis in reason or law. Even Ginsburg, who's no conservative, called it a terrible example of judicial activism. This is the thing. If you talk to anyone, no matter what part of the spectrum they are on, if they're being honest with you, they know Roe v. Wade was crap. They know it. Now, either they might say, well, I'm happy with the result, but it made no sense. Which, by the way, was nothing but men. Now, the only people on that court were men, right? And so they were okay when men were doing that, but not. So, but it really made no sense. They invented their decision out of whole cloth. There's certainly no support for abortion in the Constitution. They found like, well, there's evidence of you have the right to privacy in the Constitution. But again, even if that's true, which most lawyers will tell you it's not, but even if that were true, does that mean I can murder someone in my home because I did it in private? I mean, obviously it makes no sense. Also note that these fundamental rights that were given to us, that's from the Declaration of Independence, but were granted to God, not the state or the government. So the state or the government, the whole point is they cannot take them away. Because they're not granting them, nor can they take them away. So we can't just take away the right to life because we feel it's convenient to us. When this was obviously the fundamental struggle of the first half of our country, right, was that clearly the intent of the founders from a philosophical perspective was that no, there'd be no slavery, but yet we obviously had it, right? So there was this obvious huge, which eventually led to the most bloody conflict in American history. And so the same can be, I think, can be said by abortion in a sense. It's kind of the modern slavery. So this argument says that the fetus isn't a person yet, so well, why not kill them? This argument is a non sequitur. So non sequitur means it does not follow. So just because, even if it was true that the child we've proven it's a human being, right? We've proven that it is a live human being. That is scientific fact, undeniable. Anyone who denies it is a science denier, period. Now, the personhood thing is a little more complicated. So, I think most traditional Catholic morality would argue that personhood is a quality rather than a quantity. And what I mean by that is you either have it or you don't. So, you are a human being, therefore you have personhood, right? But some philosophers down through the ages have argued that personhood is more qualitative. So, you have to have a certain amount of capacity for reason, thought. So in other words, a person who was who was retarded, mentally, retarded or whatever, they would not be considered a person under some philosophies. Like I said, we have always said, are you a human being? You're a person, check. Keep in mind, philosophically, we believe there's a lot more persons than just us. But a lot of times we use that as interchangeable terms, but angels are persons, and the Holy Trinity are three divine persons, right? So personhood is a bigger concept than just humanity. But if they're not, so let's grant their premise. Fine. The zygote in the womb, the little tiny child in the womb, is not a person yet. They don't have enough brain development to reach the level of personhood. Let's grant that. Why does that mean we go kill them? Right? Because it's obvious that they're going to develop into a person. And you believe that once they're a person, you don't have the right to kill them. Well, why do we have the right to kill them 2 days before they acquire personhood? I mean, even if that makes any sense. But the point is that their argument doesn't follow. It's a non sequitur. And like I said, the problem is whenever you place the value of a human person on a quantity rather than, on a quantity rather than a quality. And what I mean by that, quality, you have it or you don't. Quantity, it's kind of like you can have some of it but not get there. And what I mean by that is, so the quality, I would be saying, are you a human being? You're a person. The quantity would be arguing, do you have a certain level of brain capacity? Then we award you personhood. The problem with that is A, where do you draw the line? Who gets to decide where the line is? And whenever you do any of that, you will always cast a net larger than you think. There's always going to be a group of people that you fall into that net. People who are in comas, people who have mental illnesses. Like, oh, I guess we could just kill them because they're not persons, right? So you create a pretty horrible hellscape, really. And this is kind of an interesting one. So let's cede to them. At least that we don't know where personhood begins. Maybe it's right away. Maybe it's 3 months. Maybe it's a year. Let's see that. If you were out hunting with your friend and you got lost and separated, and you had a loaded gun, and you saw rustling in the bushes, would you shoot because it might not be your friend? Obviously you wouldn't. The moment you got separated from your friend, you're not firing that rifle, even if it is the best buck you ever saw, because you don't know where your friend is. So why are we indiscriminately shooting at people that could be persons? And it's not like we have proof one way or the other. I'm almost through all my arguments. I want to finish, so we're going to finish these arguments. They're setting up lunch, so I'm almost done with the arguments that I thought of. So it'll be a great time. We'll break, we'll grab food, we'll kind of reconvene. I'm just going to try to finish through these. And then you can think as you're eating of different arguments that you have heard. And then we'll come back together. And then I'll be able to A, answer any questions you have, and B, respond to arguments that you have heard that I didn't think of. So this one thing is, so anyone who considers themselves a libertarian, it's very frustrating to me, usually is pro-choice, pro-abortion. Because, the libertarian people should have choice. But to me, the whole philosophical underpinning of libertarianism is the idea that the government shouldn't tell us what we can, basically the government is supposed to kind of stay off as much as possible, right? But the libertarians do believe that the government does need to exist to protect us from enemies, foreign and domestic, right? That's why we have a police force, that's why we have an army, because if we didn't, China would invade, or someone would rob your house and kill you, right? So we need police. And so the whole point of the libertarian view is government is there to keep us from killing each other. Well, that's exactly what happens in abortion, right? We are killing someone else. And the government is saying, I'm not going to get involved. So to me, that's what frustrates me. So if you find a philosophical libertarian, or maybe you are one, but if you know, to me, if they were consistent, they would be hardcore pro-life. Because the whole point of libertarian is that the government the government needs to interfere when people want to kill each other, but other than that, the government kind of stays hands off. And, well, that's exactly what's happening in abortion. Is that defenseless person is being murdered, and the government's like, I'll allow it. So, this one is super duper common. This is the parasite argument. So this says, well, the child is in fact a parasite. I heard one, this is a classic, I guess. So you probably heard this, but this is like a classic. So there's this one woman who came up with this argument. Imagine one day you woke up in your bed and you were attached by tubes to, like, I can't remember what she says, like a penis or something. But a person, right? Some person. And you find out that he's very sick and he needs 9 months to kind of siphon stuff off of you. But that 9 months, he'll be good and he'll walk out the door and go live his life. And should you be forced to deal with this random person attached to your body that you didn't ask for? Okay? And so there's a couple problems with this. So first, there was an action that happened the night before that guy was attached to you. That was probably your choice, right? Excluding those rare cases of rape and incest. But even that, even if that was true, does that give you the right to kill this person? Right? But it's not only that, but it's not just a random person, it's your own daughter or son. And I think we would all agree, and even most normal people would agree, parents have an obligation to their children. Yeah, you have an obligation to that child. You know, you made a choice, and you know, like I said, the football field has a rule. You know, there's you're out of bounds. That's a holding, right? There are rules to life, and we have to kind of go with the punches. But anyways, so the parasite argument, though, on itself is pretty ridiculous. Parasites are always different than their host. They're not the same species. Also, yes, children are dependent on the mother, but every one of us are. If you ruled life as you're no longer worthy of life, if you cannot completely defend for yourself, then really the only one you got is someone who's living out in the wild, farming their own food. But even if you kind of give most of us that status, anybody who's in the hospital, anyone who's under the age of 10, probably older than that, like, you know, the vast majority of us would just starve and die, right? And so it's a totally ridiculous argument. More. Oh, good. This is it. This is the last one. Okay, so this one, I don't know. This one, after all these really, I don't know what you want to call them, extreme, pro-life, whatever. These laws have come out. Even some conservatives have been like, hey, we're going too fast. What's going to happen is this is going to go to the Supreme Court. They're going to rule in favor of Roe v. Wade, and then we're really up a creek without a paddle. So, I personally disagree with this because for the last 20 years, states have been making what I would call anodyne pro-life laws. So Iowa is a perfect example of this. So we made a pro-life law like, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And it said that if you're going to get an abortion, you need to wait 3 days after the discovery or diagnosis or whatever. You go into the abortion clinic, they say you are pregnant, so then you have a 3-day waiting period. That was struck down by the local Iowa court, and the local Iowa court said, in fact, that the Constitution of Iowa actually gives you the right to abortion. Yeah, I'm sure those mid-19th century Iowans were all pro-aborts, that they put it into the Constitution. But so now we actually have a constitutional right in the state of Iowa to abortion. So, but the thing is, one thing that people don't realize about Roe v. Wade, but specifically the other major Supreme Court decision on this was Planned Parenthood versus Casey, or Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which was like a 1991 case, I think. And in that case, the Supreme Court said that states could make, relatively conservative, and by that I mean like relatively anodyne laws regarding abortion. And so Iowa was, when they made this totally anodyne 3-day waiting period, completely following Casey versus Planned Parenthood. So in other words, they were going right down the law of what they could do. Now what happened? Struck down and magically found abortion in the Iowa Constitution. Now, what should have happened if our system worked is that should have been appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court should have chastised the Iowa court and said, hey, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, dude, you guys are totally in the wrong. They had the right to make an anodyne law like that. But that never does happen, does it? It never works up the chain. So the irony is, the Alabama law, for example, is totally, utterly against all the legal laws in our country right now, right? Roe v. Wade, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, totally flies in the face of them. But it so aggressively flies in the face of them, it might actually make its way to the Supreme Court, and who knows. So it's kind of this weird irony. So we've made anodyne laws for the last 20 years, and no one cares. And the pro-abort people didn't care. It was never made the news. But these new laws are freaking them out. So something's going on. But anyways, so personally, I think unless they make a lot of noise, it won't go to the Supreme Court. Okay, well, so we've been talking for about an hour.